All right, it's time for a very special podcast episode. I'm Daniel,
And I'm Reynard.
and we are here with our 2023 highlights, finally in February.
That is the end of 2023, right? I'm still writing 2023 on all my notebooks and stuff, so.
We are here, and this video is going to be a little bit different from what a lot of people do, because usually people do like, a top 10 of movies of 2023, and we wanted to do a kind of a different approach to this, where we wanted to look at movies that aren't getting a lot of the spotlight, because a lot of movies that have come out that are really good, a lot of people have agreed they're really good and they're being talked about. But we wanted to kind of talk about some more smaller movies, like ones that haven't done the rounds, or not necessarily like out of the way entirely, like have some more mainstream ones on my list, but just ones that we feel like could use a little bit more love, or like something that just something we want to talk about. Like it's kind of a loose thing that we're doing.
Yeah. It's kind of, I don't even know what criteria I had for the ones I picked. Just kind of stuff that worked with me for different ways. And yeah, we'll get to all the big stuff next time around. So just kind of a tip of the hat to the rest of cinema.
There was I'll kind of start off with a bit of an honorable mention, because I was thinking about talking about Domingo in the Mist, which was this great Costa Rican movie about an old man trying to save his home from destruction. He talks to the spirit of his dead wife in a cloud of mist. But there's nowhere you can legally watch this movie.
Oh, God.
So it's like, I don't know if I should put this on the list to recommend to people if nobody can see it.
Mm-hmm.
But at least put the name out there.
Yeah.
And then, did you want to do like an honorable mention, or like I saw you had some
yeah, I did have an honorable mention, and it's mostly just because I only literally saw it yesterday, so, I really enjoyed the Danish film, The Promised Land. It stars Mads Mikkelsen as kind of this, like, period, like, battle of egos between this guy that wants to settle the sort of untamed heath and the local landlord. But again, I only just saw it. It's kind of bears some similarities to a movie I will talk about, but it kind of escalates up to like Game of Thrones tier tension. So it's fun, but I just didn't know. I hadn't percolated on it quite long enough, so I didn't want to like fully commit.
Right. I mean, I actually really want to see that, because at first I thought it was one of those kind of like those Christploitation films. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. And I was like, oh wait, Mads Mikkelsen, he's a real actor.
Yeah, he's really good in it. And the antagonist is great as well. I forget the actor's name.
Yeah, so I really want to see that. Yeah, I'll go ahead. I kind of start things off, and like I said, like, there's no real criteria for this one. So this one is like a bit more like a mainstream franchise release. I just want to give a little shout out to this year's A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, actually. And I just want to give us a little shout out, because we're living in a time where the franchise machine is really running on dregs at the moment. I mean, we all know that Madam Web is going to be the cinematic event of the century, but let's be real, like a lot of franchises are they're really struggling to kind of push themselves thinner and thinner. Mm-hmm. And this was a movie that felt like it had a reason to exist, actually. Admittedly, it does kind of feel like two different movies tied together, but both those halves are still really good. It's this interesting, like a prequel that actually has something to explore, some new insight to deliver. And it probably helps as well that there's actual source material for this. Not just, a studio wants to grab a little bit more money from a franchise.
Oh, did she write another one?
Yeah, this was Suzanne Collins, wrote Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes a few years ago. And of course it got turned into this movie. So it gives it like a little bit more meat to it. It's kind of fun seeing President Snow's backstory and seeing how the games became not just this spectacular method of punishment, but this institution in their own right, and how that transition happened. And again, this is just a franchise that I was actually really into back when it was first coming out, and so seeing it return and be like, oh, this is actually a good entry in it, is very satisfying to see.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice when they can actually like pay off on that rather than just feeling like a kind of a stale, dollar grab, especially coming so late after those were released,
Yeah, thank God for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what's your first entry on your list?
Yeah, so I'm mildly cheating because I picked a best restoration of the year. I think we're living really fortunate to be in a time when there's all these like Cinematheques and like you have the Scorsese World Film Project or whatever that's called, and like Janus Films and stuff like that are kind of reviving older films and kind of giving them a nice little buffing and stuff and then re-releasing them. The film I picked is fairly recent, but it deserved this kind of 4K restoration. It's Werkmeister Harmonies by Béla Tarr and Agnes Trinitzky. It's a Hungarian film that it feels like a fable. It kind of explores life in this small community. It's like vaguely Soviet bloc, but it's also anachronistic. There's like a poster at one point that's like just that like early 2000s like word art on it. You're like, okay. But it kind of like revolves around life in this town. It centers on Janos, who's kind of this like, he's a newspaper delivery man / like handyman. He's kind of this like Bergman-esque holy fool. He's very optimistic and innocent. And his uncle Georgi, who's a pianist and kind of this ideologue. And it basically, at the beginning of the film, the circus comes to town, and it has this taxidermied whale and this like kind of demagogue figure, and it's sort of a parable for how like totalitarianism can create just twist people and make them inhuman, and how dissent kind of gets ground under the wheel of that. You have your innocence in the form of Janos, and Georgi kind of like rails against music, like how we perceive it. Like we have this even tempering now where we're like, that sounds right, that sounds in tune, but it wasn't always that way. The ancient Greeks listened to music differently, and so he says that we're not perceiving music correctly, we're like indoctrinated into it. And so kind of you have these two figures, and you see how as this circus kind of changes everything, how are they treated. And it's these really beautiful long takes. The score by Mihaly Vig reduces me to tears like within 5 minutes of the film starting. It's really remarkable. It requires patience to watch, but it's really rewarding. And I think Criterion are releasing it later this year, so it'll be accessible.
That'll be awesome. Yeah, I really want to see that because it sounds really interesting. So this whale then, I'm kind of looking a little. I'm kind of cheating off of your notes a bit here. So Janos, he's able to find some beauty in there that everybody else only sees a monster in.
Yeah, it kind of could evoke like the Leviathan of the Bible, but he finds wonder in it, kind of like, God loves all of his creations or something like that. It's not super religious, but you could kind of draw those parallels.
Yeah, where it's like everything has some beauty to it, and this person comes in, it's like, oh, look at this scary thing, and it's like, well, maybe it's not so scary.
Mm-hmm. It is a little scary
totalitarian. I had to see the scary whale.
Yeah.
See the scary whale. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I do want to see that. I'm looking forward to that coming on Criterion.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting up to my next entry. A very obscure movie. You probably haven't heard of it. Dungeons and Dragons. And I kind of debated having this on here because it's like everyone has been talking about, oh, it's underrated. And if everyone agrees that it's good and underrated, is it really underrated? And I don't really want to get into the semantics of that. I'll let Reddit argue the semantics of that. The point is, I had a good time with this movie.
It's so fucking fun.
Yeah, it was just, it has this really great blend of the digital effects with props, costumes, and prosthetics. They have like practical in there as well. It has a life to it, It's, and what I like is that obviously you get more out of the movie if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, the game. But if you go in and you have no familiarity with the game, it's still a fun adventure movie.
Oh, totally.
Like, there's been a lot of talk this year, like fan service in movies. And for me, this is the best kind of fan service because it creates new fans. It makes people say, oh, this is fun. I want to know more.
Totally.
Yeah. And also just, oh, go ahead.
No, it was one of those ones where, like, for the first, 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, where's this going? And then the minute you throw a Birdman out a window and you're off to the races, you're like, all right, here we go.
Yes. I also have to give this movie props because earlier this year, we kind of saw the beginning of Disney's film collapse.
Self-immolation.
There we go. That's a better term for it. Quantumania just come out, and that was bad. We didn't really like it. And I was like, oh, am I becoming one of those people that doesn't enjoy blockbuster movies? And then this came out. I was like, okay, no, I can still have fun at the movies. It's just the studios that are the problem. But yeah, I know people have been talking about this, and they're right. It's a good movie. I really hope that it gets long legs because I want there to be more like it, please.
Yeah, learn the right lessons from this.
Yeah, I'll pass the ball back over to you.
Yeah, I'm kind of in similar territory with my next pick in a movie that I just had a really enjoyable time watching in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, except apparently it's no longer Part 1. I don't know what they're going to retitle it. The next one.
Wait, really?
Yeah, on streaming, it's just Dead Reckoning. Yeah. And I think the reason is, because, even though Christopher Nolan tried to save cinema after COVID, with Tenet, that was a complete disaster, and then Tom Cruise actually saved the blockbuster with Top Gun Maverick, so it's a little ironic twist that Oppenheimer and Barbie, completely obliterated this, coming out only a week before those two juggernauts. Yeah, so I guess life finds a balance somehow. But yeah, this is a Christopher McQuarrie film. It's pretty, I don't have that much to say about it. Basically, Tom Cruise and company are trying to, save the world from ChatGPT, essentially. But it's
good on them.
Yeah, I mean, I want people to have the right number of fingers in my art. But I think it's a good example of the two-parter, which apparently now, who knows, it's still, but it's a two-parter done right. We talked earlier about Spider-Verse, and one of our columns was kind of it feeling chopped off, and I know we both saw Fast 10, and that just also ends very arbitrarily. And this one, there's it's not a cliffhanger. There's stuff to build toward, or stuff to be done, but we also have some arcs kind of satisfyingly conclude. We get an adversary kind of joins the team. You have some other kind of things get wrapped up, and it just feels like a whole piece, and just
right,
memorable, nice characters and excellent set pieces.
Yeah, it was just it's one of those movies I was okay, good. I can still have fun at the movies because this just has, like you said, great set pieces, great action, and it concludes in a way where, obviously you have the threads open for part 2 or whatever they're going to call the next part now. But we still feel okay, we got a complete experience here.
Absolutely.
Which is very important. My next entry is one called Jules. That's Jules, Jules, like Jules Verne. And this was an interesting because I didn't really know what this movie was about before I went to it. I just knew that apparently there was an alien, and I was like, I love aliens, so I'm gonna see this movie. Directed by Mark Turtletaub, written by Gavin Steckler. And this is a movie that I hesitate to call it truly great, but it's really solid, it's worthy of love, and it's very much an old people kind of movie. The main characters are all elderly, and I feel like the overall theme of the movie would resonate more to me if I was like 30 years old or so. I don't know, I'll go ahead and tease that now. 30 years down the line, we're going to do a podcast where we revisit Jules.
We're committed now.
Hold me to that. Yes, it's about this old man played by Ben Kingsley named Milton. And he's this old retired man. He's a widower. He goes around town, he goes to, like, the town hall meetings to complain about stuff. And then an alien crashes in his yard. And at first he tries to call the police. He tells people about what's happened, and they just kind of shrug him off. It's like, oh, Milton's going senile. Milton's daughter, you got to take care of your dad. He thinks there's an alien in his yard. And the kind of like the cruel twist of fate is that he is actually starting to lose his faculties. We can kind of start to see it through the movie. And as he ends up like taking care of the alien and everything, which by the way is like a really solid looking effect. It's kind of hard to describe because like the movie overall is it's not super flashy, not super stylized. But then it almost, in some ways, it kind of looks like, well, a Hallmark movie. And then you just have this alien sitting there. It's an entirely mute performance, by the way, and it actually comes across pretty well. And so just over the course of the movie, Milton's like, how do you handle being lonely as an older person? How do you handle the fact that maybe you are in decline? How do you handle people, even your own family, shrugging you off as irrelevant?
Yeah, is it? So I take it it's a bit more kind of drama angled than a comedy. Yeah, it's like a lot more like a drama and everything. Like there's some like innate comedy to it as well, where it's like, because he invites someone in and they find the alien there because he doesn't think to hide it. He's just like, I want people to know there's an alien in my house to help me deal with it. So it's just like I will say there's a part in the movie, this isn't on screen, but someone's head explodes in this movie. Oh, okay.
It's like, because he has a friend who, and she's trying to like do this program, like, oh, we partner with younger people in our community to kind of pass off what we know. And then, the young man that she's working with is taking advantage of her, like trying to like go through her stuff. She confronts him, and he starts attacking her, and Jules like senses this from Jules is the name they give the alien, hence the title of the movie.
Sure.
He senses this from like across town, so he just like his face kind of goes blue, and we see like the struggle happening, and then kind of cuts back to Jules. His face goes back to normal. He turns back to front, and then later on, there's like, yeah, his head just exploded. I was like, oh my god.
Just totally normal for the aliens. So like, we just do that all the time. It's our conflict mediation technique.
Can't be conflict. The other person doesn't have a mouth anymore. Yeah, it was good movie. It's worth checking out. And I do think that, while it doesn't resonate with me super well right now, it might resonate with me more as I get older. So
yeah, it's always interesting when you kind of like channel like all these real sort of emotions into something so heightened as like an alien showing up, and kind of how can you use that to tell a story in an interesting fashion.
Exactly. All right, I'll pass it off to you now.
So I veered more in the direction of comedy with the absolutely just dark satire of Emma Seligman's Bottoms.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, this is a good one.
I love this movie. I I've seen her previous feature, Shiva Baby, which is like a comedy, but it's also the most like stressful thing you'll ever like experience, like secondhand anxiety. This one's less so, but it stars the same actor, Rachel Sennott. Yes. It's basically like high school is always rough, but this Rockwood Falls High, it just is completely on a whole other level. I really like a world where it's kind of like you've taken like a picture frame and like canted it to like, you know, like 15 degrees. So everything is like the same specific kind of off. You know, we have this like this crosstown rivalry that's just an actual blood feud. And there's like propaganda for the star quarterback in town. And, you know, it's like, it's okay to be gay, but not gay, ugly, and untalented. So like we're in this bizarre world, and it basically centers on these two girls, PJ and Josie, who want to just start a fight club because they've gotten in trouble, and like they want to basically use this as an excuse to like find hot girls to like hook up with. And obviously when everything is just completely founded on a lie, nothing goes wrong and everything goes very smoothly. It's just like I miss this kind of like mean comedy where it's like everyone's a little kind of rough around the edges, and like you don't have to pull all your punches. And I don't mean this in like a, you know, like I can't make comedy anymore because I'm gonna get canceled or whatever, like these Zoomers and their
right
you know. But it's just like this just feels a little bit more like, you know, Heathers or something, like the 80s kind of like run of high school comedies where there's some like kind of bite to it. And just I adore background humor. Like all of the whiteboards and blackboards in the school are like just constantly, there's just weird shit on them. Like the announcements overhead are insane. Marshawn Lynch is like a history teacher, but also he teaches feminism or something. It's just such a fun like romp, and just it ends in bloodshed and craziness, and I don't know, it's a fun just kind of statement.
Yeah, there's just, and I think you kind of hit upon something there, because like, you know, a lot of like, I guess they say the mean comedy nowadays has kind of been subsumed into that kind of like, oh, I can't make fun of minorities anymore.
Right,
what are we
yeah.
on? You know, it's like, but something like this, you know, like Bottoms, which is able to, because you have to be a very, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You need to be mindful when you're using this kind of thing, because you know, obviously, you always want to be kind of punching up, I guess you could say. You know, and, you know, kind of poking fun at these different things, these kind of different experiences, especially nowadays, like, you know, high school, you know, circa 2010s, 2020s, is very different from what it was in the 1980s.
Absolutely.
And I feel like increasingly older Hollywood executives haven't really gotten that message, so we still get the same tropes, and Bottoms comes in and it's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, and I think it also allows for that meanness because it does acknowledge that the two central characters are not like good people, and while it's not some kind of moralistic thing, they still do have to kind of introspect and recognize what they've done. It's a little messy with that, but it still is working on that, so it helps to balance all of this out.
Yeah, you know, the intent is there. The one moment in the movie that really made me go like, oh my god, they can't be doing this, is like, you know, this quiet kid, like someone like pelts him in the back or something. He's like, that's it. He turns over his notebook. He's like, plan to blow up this school. I was like, oh no.
That was so good. It's just immediate. There's not even a beat. He's just
I know what I must do. Terrible. Yeah, moving up my list here. I want to talk about Suzume. Written and directed by Makoto Shinkai, who did Your Name and Weathering with You. It's a new anime film from him. Follows a high school girl named Suzume, who finds a young man heading into some ruins outside of town, and she follows him, and he finds a door. And from there, she gets caught up in this whole hidden side of the world where this evil worm is trying to emerge and destroy the surface via earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is the movie ends up being about the 2011 earthquake, tsunami, nuclear disaster in Japan. And at first I was like, oh, like, because I had these events kind of in my mind, I was like, oh, this has some interesting parallels there. And then the movie very explicitly becomes about that. Like, it's an actual important event in the main character's life.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, you know, how do you overcome that disaster, things like that. It was very good, and the animation was breathtaking. Makoto Shinkai, like, his movies always look so good.
Yeah, I really like Weathering with You. Like the visual.
Like the visuals on this, so good. And like the final moments of this movie were just transcendent. She's like talking to her younger self, and like the stars are wheeling in the background, and it's yes, good.
I love with how animation you can really crank that kind of thing to 11 and make it so transcendent. And...
yeah, and yeah, it's like and like the. You know, it's really good. I didn't put it higher because this did kind of get, you know, this goes around the anime circle specifically. But still, deserves a shout out. Back over to you.
All right. My next film is decidedly not a comedy. I saw this at SIFF Festival. It's this really exquisite tension piece called The Beasts by Rodrigo Sorogoyen. And it's basically, it centers on this French couple who have relocated recently to a small like farming community in Galicia, and they want to kind of restart their lives. We don't really know anything about their past, but they're kind of, you know, of modest means and whatnot. But their neighbors don't like them at all. There's a lot of kind of like xenophobia and stuff towards them. And then on top of it, there's a problem because their valley, which is pretty like impoverished, they're really not making ends meet as farmers, but the area is really promising for like wind farming. So there's this Norwegian like windmill company, for lack of a better term, that have made an offer basically like for the land rights to the area. And the farmers all want it because they see the dollar signs or the euros. But these newcomers, Antoine and Olga, are resistant to it, in part because they have actually like read the contract and they realize that it's like there may be a short-term gain, but the long-term doesn't really pay out as well for them, or, you know, for the people living locally. And then also there's a self-centered aspect to it where they like moved here because it's so beautiful, and they're like, well, now there's gonna be this eyesore constantly just blocking everything, you know. So everyone's kind of got their motives and their interests, and when the problem is everybody has to buy in. So when their neighbors Sean and Lorenzo find out that these two are the sole holdouts, like, it really escalates tensions, and it kind of, the way that it does this is so exquisite. Like, it starts off little small things, you know, like they'll wake up and find that there are a bunch of like empty bottles of booze in their front yard, or then it'll kind of escalate to, you know, they'll see people walking around their house at night, or they'll be driving down a remote road and all of a sudden these, you know, headlights will light up, and it just keeps going and going. And, you know, it's class warfare, it's xenophobia, it's all these different elements kind of intertwined, and neither side, you know, every side has its motives, and they're not, the way it's expressed is obviously wrong, but they're like, you can understand elements of where they're coming from. It's also got a really strong performance by Denis Ménochet. He was like the guy at the farm at the opening part of Inglourious Bastards. He's this very like imposing presence, but he is so interesting to watch.
I am actually going to be, just hearing you talk about it, I'm going to be adding this to my watch list right now, because this sounds incredible.
It's really good. I was like, sweating bullets.
Because this, I love, that's the kind of thing I really love. Like, one of my favorite kind of genres, just like those dramas where you have these different things intersecting, like the xenophobia, the classism, these things where you have like, these people, they want a lot of money right now, which makes sense because they're not doing so hot, and someone's like, well, you could have, this is gonna be bad for us in the long term, but then this intersecting things, I have to see this now. It sounds really fascinating.
Well, yeah, worth a watch.
Here, next one, and this is actually one that we both watched. The Royal Hotel.
Oh yeah.
Directed by Kitty Green, which she co-wrote with Oscar Redding. A pair of young backpacking women take a break from the globe-trotting to try and earn some extra money working a bar in the Australian outback. But while they're out there, they get a lot more than they bargained for. Why did I write this like I'm selling it? But I was really taken aback by how scary and intense this was for a non-horror movie. Because you see these because they get there, they start working, and the local guys are just very lecherous, and it's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it did a really good job at making me empathize with their plight. And I choose that word, empathize, very carefully. Because I can certainly sympathize with women who feel unsafe in certain spaces and scenarios, but when it comes down to, like, I'm a man, I'm a big man in real life, and in real life I'm never going to be able to really experience that. But this film, I was able to feel that tension being evoked through the cinematic language. I could feel the menace of just these guys who just pop up at these very weird, uncomfortable, and wrong times. You're just like, oh my god, it just made my skin crawl. And it was great.
Yeah, they do a really good job of, like, just this, even the smallest, like, kind of gesture, like, it's just a little bit too much, like you bang the bottle too hard on the counter or something, and you really kind of, they're reveling in what they're creating for these two.
Yeah, and it's just for that one aspect alone, it's like, I really want to highlight, because, like, there's some other stuff with the movie where, like, it's not quite, like, there's some parts of the movie, it's like, oh, it could have been, like, a little stronger, but just that one aspect was so powerful for me. It's like, it's worth it for that alone, I would say.
No, it's a good little movie.
Yeah. Seeing, going back over to you.
Yeah, I just have a quick shout out, and I did break your rule of films that are probably inaccessible. Hopefully this will end up on VOD sometime, but I really enjoyed the locally produced film Fantasy A Gets a Mattress. It's directed by Noah Zoltan Sofian and David Norman Lewis. It's basically Fantasy I was convinced was like an urban legend for the longest time, because there's just, in Seattle, there's all these posters for these rap concerts and these rap, like, everything. He's always hustling. But he's the actual true rap god of Seattle, not fucking Macklemore, not any of that shit. And basically, the film, I don't even know how to describe it. Really, it's insane. It basically follows, Fantasy A gets kicked out of his group home, and he has to find a mattress, hence the title. The movie, like, literally ends just when he gets the mattress. And you're like, okay. But he also wants to hustle, and, like, he wants to kind of revitalize his music career by making a music video. So he's kind of got these various, like, a videographer and other people just kind of trying to, help him and whatnot. And so it kind of just becomes this, like, crosstown odyssey as he just visits these different, like, locations, and he'll gig at this bar that's trying to, scam him, and he'll meet up with this weird, like, I think it's like, it's like a fever dream. Just all these strange little funny characters. And so it's like, on the one hand, it's kind of this absurdist comedy that's sort of like, I don't know, not quite Freddy Got Fingered light, but like in that sort of vein of just crazy stuff happening, treated completely perfectly. And also kind of like, there is an element of like satire where like issues like gentrification and affordable housing are things that are really important to this city and probably many other cities, but are not being adequately addressed. And so like in this, all the landlords are like these megalomaniacs who like one woman will get like she got this like card that says like, guess who's getting evicted, and she opens it and there's just like a mirror. So it's like,
oh my god.
So it's like completely funny, but there's this like this kind of righteous anger at the core of it that makes it interesting. And it was also just the most fun like movie going experience of the year for me. I think I saw it at the Beacon, which is kind of in Reynard Valley, neck of the woods, and like it's a little like living room type theater, but it was packed and the energy was so fun, and he came out at the end and everyone was super amped up. So it's a really fun experience. So if it ends up in some sort of, you know, on demand rental, you know, Vimeo or something, I'm hoping like hopefully it'll do that. It's definitely been making the rounds at like film festivals here and a couple like across the states and abroad. So yeah, Fantasy A Gets a Mattress, fun times.
Guess who's getting evicted? My god.
It's like really absurd.
Oh my. Yeah, I think you had mentioned like it came by here, but it was just like we only noticed it like when it was too late for me to like get off work or something. So it's like, no. Next time I'll get that mattress.
Mm-hmm.
Also have to know, when he came out like at the end of the movie, did he have the mattress with him?
No, I wish, but there was like mattresses with the title painted on it, kind of like guerrilla marketing style around town, and I was like, what is happening? What's going on? And lo and behold, this.
There we go. This indeed. Yeah, my next pick here was Polite Society, directed and written by Nida Manzoor. This is actually her debut feature film, though she's worked in television before. And it's interesting. So Manzoor, she grew up in a Pakistani Muslim family, and this movie is kind of a reflection of that. It follows two young women who are sisters, and more specifically follows a younger sister, Ria. She wants to be a stunt performer, she wants to be a cool, badass action star, and her older sister, Lena, wants to be an artist, though she's dropped out of art school. But there's this pressure from the parents to adopt a more traditional role. It's like, oh, Lena, we're all going to go to this party that is secretly a ploy for to try to get this young man married, and Lena, you're going to put your best foot forward so that hopefully he will pick you as his wife. And then it turns out that he's evil.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he's like, he has an evil plan, has like a secret lab and everything. So Ria has to save her sister from his dastardly plan. And just, yeah, like this was a very fun movie. It's, you know, it's one of those that has like a really good heart to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, like I really enjoy seeing these kinds of like these action movies. It has, I would also say, a similar DNA to something like almost like Scott Pilgrim, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Like they kind of like that heightened reality of it. Not quite at that same like level of like weird stuff going on, but definitely it kind of kicks things up and it's like, oh wait, there's like some actually like weird sci-fi stuff going on.
Yeah. More in that vein.
But yeah, it's like, again, a great debut film, and it makes me interested to see what is Manzoor going to do next. You know, I hope that we get to see more from her in the future.
Yeah. I really wanted to check that one out, but like the release in my area was super weird, so I'll have to catch it on streaming, I assume. It's on there somewhere.
It's on there somewhere. Some service out there,
of course,
has to have it. Your next movie.
Yeah. I am going with a little, kind of a bit of a left field pick with another film I saw at SIFF Fest, which is Lola, directed by Andrew Legg. Lola, I think, is an acronym for something, but I can't remember. I'm not a big fan of like the found footage genre. Like there's good, Blair Witch is great, and there's some other ones I probably off the top of my head I can't think of. But like I think this did a really good job of like using that kind of framework. It's set in the lead up to and during World War II, and it follows these two sisters, Mars and Tom, who create this device that can basically like receive radio transmissions from the future. So initially it's innocuous, like they're listening to Bowie, like, decades before he, made it big and like that kind of stuff. And they're very kind of receptive to this sort of like, they're very open people who aren't, like, oh, it's not the, whatever the ballroom dance we're doing this week is, so like they're very open to this kind of thing. But they start to get transmissions that are about essentially, the war effort and whatnot, so they're able to avert disasters that would happen, like battleship sinkings and that kind of stuff. So like the government get a hold of that and like are working with them on this, but they like as they tinker more and more and more, and like their egos kind of come into play, and one of them's like drinking more and stuff, like everything kind of falls apart. And it's the way it's kind of using, like it's stitching together like like newsreel footage and like their stuff. Like she's figured out how to like make a very early like kind of 16 millimeter handheld camera, which is how they can do all the like footage of them. There's some excuse for that. And then it's able to stitch together these other kind of more historical formats of filmmaking, which is interesting. Kind of how do you do that, and how do you kind of make little edits to the thing to make like invasions happen or whatever. But I think the more like kind of impactful aspect of it is like it more becomes about their relationship, and without like giving anything away, like the text of the film itself is very important, as like their communication to one another. So I think that kind of sets it apart, because it's not just a gimmick. It's a fun like creative exercise, but like he's also doing something to kind of give a reason for why he's telling this story in this way, rather than just like a conventional science fiction drama.
Okay. I think I remember I saw the trailer for this. I was like, oh, I really want to see this, but I don't know if it ever came by locally.
Yeah, I think it's a smaller release movie.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, I remember I really wanted to see it, and it is really nice to see how able to take this found footage thing, and people are able to do something unique with it, because it's not just like, oh, there's a monster that some kids went out to film, and we found the camera afterwards.
Yeah.
It's weird that this keeps happening.
And then there's always like, how are there so many camera angles and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like I said, this is another one that I really want to see. Gotta find it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta find it. My next one is Monica, directed by Andrea Paloro, co-written by him and Orlando Tirado. And it follows a trans woman, Monica, played by trans actress Trace Lysette, who has to come home and care for her mother in her last days. But there's a little bit of tension because her mother had rejected her for coming out as trans. But her mother's memory is failing, and she doesn't really remember who Monica is. And it's framed to her as like, oh, this woman Monica will be helping you, but her mother doesn't recognize her as her daughter. And yet, over the course of the movie, you see these little hints that maybe on some level she does recognize Monica, or at least sees her as familiar. And you're not quite certain, which makes it all the more emotional. And also, Monica is reconnecting with the rest of her family. And she meets like her nieces and nephews. And one of the young nephews, well, let's just say like he's kind of playing and acting in a way that suggests he might not be cishet when he grows up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this line that someone says to Monica, which just kind of really struck me. He's saying, he reminds me of you. in this very like tender way, and it kind of gives me the sense of like, I don't know, it's like, you know, because obviously Monica had, you know, faced a really hard time coming out from her family and everything, but as she's kind of reconnecting, maybe in the wake of that, and in her wake, you know, if this young boy ends up not being a boy, they get older, maybe it'll be easier for them. You know, it's just there's, you know, and like I said, I just really appreciate this because, again, wanting to see more of, you know, the transgender experience put onto film, put into cinema, and this was a very both stark and tender expression of that.
Yeah, I like it when you can have room for all of that. Like, it's not just dwelling on the suffering of somebody or just trying to make everything seem better now. You know, you can wrestle with all those complicated ideas in a family and in a person. And that sounds really interesting. I somehow it completely flew under the radar for me, but I'll have to give that a watch.
Yeah, if you get a chance, super recommend it. Your next entry.
My next entry. Oh, yes. So I really enjoyed the Moroccan-French co-production kind of romantic drama, The Blue Caftan by Mariam Touzani. It kind of centers on this couple. Halim is the master tailor, and he's like very kind of traditional in his methods. He's not taking any shortcuts. It's all very, manual and labor intensive in these like intricate garments that he's making. But he's also queer. He kind of spends a lot of time away, like in the evenings, like going to the baths, you know, visiting, spending time with other men. And he's still like devoted to his wife, Mina. However, she's kind of pushing him to take on an apprentice, and this guy Youssef shows up and kind of starts to throw the relationship dynamics into flux. It as they kind of settle in and sort of like some developments happen with some of the characters and stuff as far as their status, but it kind of becomes this really complicated portrait of this kind of developing, it's not like a menage a trois, but it's this like, you know, kind of unconventional relationship between the three, and it's just got such a tenderness to it, and kind of how the circumstances these people are facing kind of necessitates this sort of love and radical acceptance. It kind of reminded me of like Y Tu Maman Tambien in some of its regards. That's more about kind of like youth and this older woman, whereas this is a little bit more kind of even keeled in terms of everyone's dynamic, but something about that kind of reminds me. But yeah, it's just such an emotionally honest movie that I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I always like when movies are able to kind of depict relationships that don't necessarily fit like a particular trope, so to say, because it's like, oh, it's has to be like this or that or that, but you know, in real life, relationships can be, you know, can be messy, have different layers to them, and it's nice to see a movie that can portray something more honestly, that doesn't have, oh, this is going to fit into this category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the titular garment kind of becomes important to the whole thing as this sort of common thread throughout the whole film, and is very important to the kind of trajectory of Mina, especially. Moving
into top 3. People keep pinging me on Discord. I'm busy. How to Blow Up a Pipeline is my number 3 highlight of the year. Daniel Goldhaber, director, follows a group of people who are each affected by the oil industry and in some destructive way. You know, the federal government is abusing eminent domain to take their land, or the refining process is making them or their families ill. Worsening heat waves kill their families, so on and so forth. So they all get together and they're like, you know what? We're done with the protests. We're done with trying to divest our schools that we go to. We're gonna blow up a goddamn pipeline and get their attention one way or another. And just the fact that this movie like this exists is kind of like it's quite bold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, you know, is this what we have to do to get the attention of the people with power? Because we can be like, oh, you know, it's wait for the next election cycle, strategize with things as, you know, pollution gets worse and worse, you know, as these effects keep piling up, people get sick, people die, and it's like, no, we need to act now. You know, is this what we need to do?
Mm.
And also just like in like for the actual filmmaking itself, I was particularly struck by the way it was edited. It was cut in this way that felt very fast paced, but without feeling too rushed.
Okay,
You know,
just like propulsive.
Very propulsive, just like the way that you can kind of notice the way that things that like actions that would normally be in a movie, like it's like, oh, like between a person, you know, going from like one location to another, just smash cuts those things together in a way that is noticeably quick. I don't know how to like describe it super in depth, but yeah, it had great tension to it. And at the end, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna blow the fucking pipeline myself.
It really sounds like that novel, The Monkey Wrench Gang, about like the activists that they're interfering with like, I think oil refineries and stuff, but like they want to like, I think they end up wanting to blow up the Glen Canyon Dam or something, but it sounds familiar to that. Kind of like, well, damn it, I'll do it myself.
Because this movie actually is based off of a book by the same name.
Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere.
Pass it back over to you. We're up to our final couple movies each, I believe.
Yeah, I have 3. You ranking it from highest to lowest to be doing the opposite is like really messing with my scrolling.
I know. It was so funny because I went like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 through all mine and filled them in accordingly, which means I'm like reading. I have to start like the bottom of my notes and go up. And when Reynard just came in and was looking at my notes, he thought that I had somehow ranked the Hunger Games movie as the #1 highlight of the year for me.
I mean, to each their own. But yeah, my next film is easily as commercially and popularly successful as The Hunger Games. It's Godland, directed by Hlynur Pálmason. It's set in, don't remember what century, in Iceland when it was under Danish occupation. It was a Danish colony. And it's basically follows this priest who is supposed to kind of set up a church that's supposed to be built in a kind of a rural town on the coast of Iceland. It's this kind of journey into the heart of darkness for him as he sort of experiences both the Icelandic landscape and also its people, who are obviously like not super happy about Denmark kind of occupying their land.
Right.
He's like very taken by Iceland, which is, not difficult to understand, but he's also a little bit of like a softie. Like he, for example, he gets to Iceland and then opts to like take the overland route to the town rather than the easier like coast, just sailing there essentially, because he wants to he's got this huge camera set up, and he wants to take pictures and stuff, but his choices on that journey get someone killed. There's a lot of difficulty there, and then when he arrives at town, there's a lot of tensions with the locals and stuff. So it's kind of shot in the really tight aspect ratio of those early photographs and plates, and there's also vignetting to the frame, which kind of makes it look like a photograph, essentially a moving picture, if you will. and which comes into play in kind of how the story like kind of ends up. But it's just really gorgeous to look at the way that he uses that kind of Paul Musson uses that tight aspect ratio to still capture like vastness is really interesting, but also uses that to again convey tensions and kind of how do people break in this kind of forced circumstance.
Because I want to see more like Icelandic, actually. Like
it was an Icelandic-Danish co-production. Yeah, Iceland has like a burgeoning film industry. I know, yeah. They've got a really interesting, I think Lamb, that 2019, the film that A24 distributed is probably like a big one that most people recognize, but like Rams is a really good film about these farmers that have to deal with like the culling of there's a lot of movies about sheep. Yeah, there's some interesting filmmakers coming out there. Johan Johansson, the late great composer, made a film called The Last and First Men. It's like this kind of very avant-garde reading of a novel it's narrated by Tilda Swinton. It's kind of this imagery that's very kind of alien and stark. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff.
And now we're moving into our final two. Which, I had that order all wrong before. I am a very silly person. Munster. It's my number 2 pick of the year. Director Hirokazu Koreeda, written by Yuji Sakamoto, and it follows 3 different perspectives of the same story. It starts with a woman who sees her son coming home from school, and it's like, oh, he's kind of acting weird, like he's missing a shoe, you know, he's acting very strange, and he tells her like, oh, the teacher. You know, like he's like, what's going on? Tell me. He's like, well, things, the teacher, is being mean to me. He starts telling the story, and so we follow from her perspective. And at first, it's like, oh, it's a sort of like this teacher who is abusing the student, and then about a half hour later, the story restarts from the perspective of the teacher, and we see his view on everything, and they're like, okay, so this is what's actually going on. Here's the real story. And then another half hour later, the story restarts again from the kid's point of view, and we get the actual real story of what's going on, and you're like, oh my god. It's like at every point in the movie, the story I thought I was watching was totally different. And I was like, every half hour, I believed that it was a different story than it ended up being. And
that's interesting.
Usually you say that, yeah, and usually like you say that about a movie, that's not a good sign. But here, it's pulled off in just this really great way. And I won't spoil any more of it. Let's just say I feel like the title of the movie, Monster, is kind of referring to like, who is the real monster in this story, and and yeah,
so
without
it's not
spoiling
like...
any. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, so it's not like Rashomon or like The Last Duel, where it's like that it's the same story but just different perspectives. It's more unexpected than that.
Kind of, because like you look at like Rashomon, it's like there's you have like the different perspectives on it, but you don't really get. You're not necessarily sure like who is fully telling the truth. With this one, it's more of just like each person is like, because with Rashomon, it's kind of like, oh, each person is telling the story with their own perspective, their own biases, their own agendas. Whereas with this movie, it feels like each iteration of the story we see is kind of like is quote unquote objectively filmed, but it's just that the character only sees part of it.
Right.
And then it's so rather than the character coming up with their own version and then we, and feeding it to us, we the viewer, are, come to our own conclusion about, oh, this is what the story is, this is what's going on. this is who is at fault. And then we see more information that makes us realize, oh, we have to shift what we thought was true.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. The same director actually did last year's The Broker.
Mm-hmm.
It's a South Korean movie. And he's so good from what I've seen so far with these dramas that are just so powerful.
Yeah, I love Korea like that. Barker and Shoplifters, I think. Yeah, and yeah.
Also, there's this really clever twist they did where there's a sound cue that like you hear a couple times in the movie that you think is just like, oh, it's part of the sound design, and then it ends up actually being diegetic.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's, again, I won't spoil too much of this because it's, again, really great movie that just yeah. You can't see, but I'm just like, I'm motioning over my heart. It's just very, it makes me feel things in here, okay?
It's always good when that happens.
I like it when movies make me feel things.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel things with Passages?
Yes. I also felt shame because I saw Passages in like the program for SIF Fest. And I was like, oh, I want to see that because I'd heard like some hype. I forget where it like actually premiered. And I knew it was a French film and I assumed it was called Passage. And Ira Axe is an American director and it's like partly in English and it's called Passages and I'm an asshole. Yeah. So that's, me. It's a really interesting movie. It's about the actual worst person in the world, not the title character of that movie that came out a couple years ago. Tomas is like just a complete like ping pong ball of a human. He's basically, when we meet Tomas and then the two other kind of people in this sort of relationship, he's a film director who's wrapping his film. His husband, Martin, does like printmaking, and then he encounters this woman, Agath, at the like the wrap party. Essentially, I think she might have been like an extra or something. Don't recall. And basically, he ends up having a one-night stand with her that night, which quickly becomes a passionate affair. Except, he's very frank with Martin about this, and Martin is initially open to this, but then it kind of becomes very apparent that Tomas is like this malignant narcissist and is just self-serving at every possible turn and cannot understand how other people can't see things the way that he sees them. So it's this like just really, I don't know, it's a darkly humorous portrait of relationships and how like this one is just doomed to fail and yet people keep trying to make it happen. I really like the way it's shot. There's a number of sex scenes throughout which just have this kind of very like openness to them. Like they're very like, the people engaged in it are passionate, but the film is just kind of observing it happen, which kind of makes it a little bit like clinical in a way. Which kind of underlines this sort of like the surface level of these relationships. And then oftentimes, like especially as these relationships fall apart and he tries to kind of like go back and forth, like you get the way that the frame like cuts people out of it. Like you'll have like someone like Tomas is always the center of attention, so he'll be like in bed in a scene, and then like Martin will walk in, but you can't see his head, so you can't see his expression when he's given like a bombshell and piece of information, because his reaction frankly doesn't matter to Tomas. So just the way that we're getting from the performances, from the choice of shots and stuff, this story is really interesting and mordant.
It's really cool that they're able to kind of use the camera to kind of like, communicate that narcissism there, where you can be like, oh, by focusing just on him, on this one character, and very deliberately, noticeably cutting other people out of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a great way to kind of to really drive that point home.
Right, you're really using the medium kind of to its fullest without it being like fully like whatever is the equivalent of like the Scarlet Letter of movies. I'm sure there's plenty out there that are just like sledgehammers.
Yeah. And there's a big letter on your chest for N for narcissist.
But yeah, it's really interesting.
Time for our top movies. Well, not necessarily top movies, but like our top highlights for the year. Things that we want people to go and look at. And for me, I'm going to tell people to go look at 1001. This was feature film debut from A.V. Rockwell. She directed and wrote it. And I actually made a little short about this on my channel. I try to do shorts this year. I'm not going to do shorts anymore, I don't think. So this movie gets to be one of my only shorts that I make.
There you go.
But I still want to really advocate for this movie. So the story follows New York City mother who, quote unquote, kidnaps her son out of the foster care system so that she can raise him herself. And it follows the family struggles, how they change over time, how New York City changes over time with the gentrification and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this really, I don't know, this very powerful portrait. Because yeah, I like social drama. Like that's why this is my favorite. I like this genre of movie, anyways. And again, I don't want to spoil, but there's this big development later in the movie that really throws into contrast like everything that mother has done. You're like, wait a minute, like what the heck? And just the powerful resolution of it. I was in tears at the end of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's about these people through their life. It was kind of sucked. They were kind of in a mess, but they found the strength to pull themselves together because they formed a family here.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. And again, like this is, like already like this would have been like a movie that really resonated with me, very emotionally powerful, talking about, social stuff that again I'm really into, just because the way that it, I don't know how to describe it. But like as it's going through, you can kind of see the neighborhoods start to quote unquote look nicer. Like it's like, oh, they have these nice expensive fronts and everything. And meanwhile, in their apartment, it's like, oh, they get a new landlord who's also bought the building across the street. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, I'm gonna raise the rent. I'm gonna put this and that changes in. Gonna make it harder for you here. And just like how that negatively impacts them. Like tying that general trend into the personal story. So already like I would like this movie, and the fact that it's a debut film, again, just want to keep an eye on A.V. Rockwell in the future, because I think that she is going to impress us again.
It's always interesting when you get like such a confident debut, and it's like, all right, you're already hitting the road running, so what are you going to do next? And then kind of giving voice to that kind of story is, it's nice to see that on screen.
And again, like this top move is kind of the pinnacle of what I want to do with this video, is being able to put a spotlight on people who these movies that need a little bit more love, these new filmmakers that might need a little bit more love and everything.
Yeah.
And I guess also Hunger Games, because I'm a sucker like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what is your...
My number one is not necessarily one that needs a spotlight cast on it, because everyone on the internet appears to already have an opinion on it, and it's rather divisive. But it's a film that I really responded to just because I am drawn to movies that are interesting to me visually. That's why you go to see movies, is to like experience stories, even if I've seen the story before in some way, if I'm seeing it in a new, interesting way, or I think about like the medium differently, like that I respond to. So I really liked Emerald Fennell's sophomore feature, Saltburn. It's basically like a kind of talented Mr. Ripley for millennials sort of story. We meet Oliver, who's this kind of like hapless new student at Oxford, who kind of he's got a tragic family history, and he kind of gets brought under the wing of Felix, who's one of the more kind of like legacy students or whatever's the equivalent at Oxford, and is eventually invited to spend the summer holiday at their estate, Saltburn. And from there, things start to unravel, and you'll never think about bathwater the same way.
Oh no.
It's just really wonderfully shot. It's in, again, like a very tight aspect ratio, kind of like Godland, but she's using that. She's still able to get these really interesting, like, sweeping shots of like a big house party they have, and the estate is really impressive to behold, even when you're just looking at it through a square. But she uses it to like really focus on power dynamics. Like you'll have people like face to face, like boxing in the frame, for example, and that creates this very intimidating environment, or like who's kind of dominant over somebody else in the frame. It also sort of, the way it takes the same approach to like sex, makes it again more about power than pleasure, and sort of looks at kind of the like approach that these characters have to it, or like how they view sex. I think Barry Keoghan is immaculate in the role. Like he's just so, he's usually like in like what, Killing of a Sacred Deer or like The Green Knight, he's just kind of like a creepy man, and he's good at doing that, but this has a lot more insidious vulnerability to it. Like Rosamund Pike and Richard E. Grant are like the consummate, like snippy, like posh British couple, and it's amazing. And then like I do think Jacob Elordi was like utilized very well, because like he was good in Priscilla, but like he's just kind of like got this like himbo energy to him that like I can never quite get over, and it's very well served in this film. Yeah, so it's just a really interesting, like, it's very confident. The score is incredible. It kind of mixes the, like, it starts with this, like, quoting of, I think, Handel, which sort of roots it in this, like, tradition, how, this old money world, and then it kind of inserts these more contemporary-minded, like, electronic elements and stuff. So, again, like, how do you get into this institution that is hell-bent on keeping you out of it through one way or another? It gets a little bit over-explaining at the end. Like, I didn't need all of that, but, I guess I can forgive it in light of everything else. Like, just seeing this kind of plot being executed is really fun, and it's also nice to already have my Halloween costume for the year sorted out, so that's good. Some good parties.
Little antlers.
A little party scene situation, like, ha!
What you're telling me, because I wanted to see this movie, and then I was like, oh, like it'll still be showing next week. I got to take care of some stuff because it's like Thanksgiving or something. And then the theater's like, oh, just kidding.
Oh.
I'm like, So, yeah. But I think it's on Amazon now.
I think so, yeah. It should be out. Yeah, it is exactly my kind of sicko movie.
I can just imagine, like, you walk up and, like, people haven't seen the movie, like, oh, that looks good. And people have seen the movie, kind of like, oh, God, oh, no, oh, no. Or maybe it's going to be the other way around, because I've not seen the movie. So I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I'll see how wrong I am when I see the movie.
Here we go.
But yeah, it's... at least, like, there's not, like, any rules to this or anything. It's just, like, pretty much, like, the only hard rule is that it can't be, because I don't want to just put a Best Picture nomination in here, because if you're nominated for Best Picture, that's like the biggest spotlight you can get.
Yeah.
And also, if you're the top grossing movie of the year, you don't need more than that. But yeah, so like, you know, like I said, we just want to talk about some movies that we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah, you know, there's a lot of great stuff this year. And now 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about all the Best Picture nominees from 2023. So we getting those heavy hitters. We'll be talking about those. And yeah, any last minute thoughts before the end of the evening?
Yeah, it's been a really pretty stacked year for movies this year. Like when we do get to the kind of more mainstream sort of like widely recognized one, it's a really, you know, pretty well, you know, excellent and deep pool of options. And then even here, you know, we could find 20 movies out there to talk about and kind of endorse. So yeah, it's been a great year, and here's to more to come.
That's right, here's to more to come indeed. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody, in the listening audience. My name is Daniel Goldhorn. You can find me, Daniel Goldhorn, on YouTube.
And I'm Reynard, /cinema on Tumblr.
And we'll see you all in a couple weeks. Take care.
Night.